I didn't even, so I was just like looking at all the tech equipment.
Yeah, so whenever you're like talking to the camera, the audience will get
That one, okay.
Yeah, now I know.
We're set when you are, Chris.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna mute me and let everybody in, and while they come in, I'll flip through a few slides and then I'll shut the slides off, and I guess Katie can cue you when I shut the slides off. Does that sound good?
Yes, that's a great transition.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I'll just look for you guys to give me a. Hi, welcome to the Western Gallery BFA Artist Talk series for the exhibition Material Mind. I'm sitting here with Chloe Dichter, who is our artist talk this afternoon. So we are pleased to be in Chloe's installation, and we're going to be chatting for about 20 minutes. And then at the end, I do want to reserve some time to address some questions that you all might have in the audience. So while Chloe and I are talking for the beginning of this, as you think of something, please go ahead and just throw it in the Q&A, and we'll come to it, at the end. We'd love to think through and process and address some of the questions that you might have. I'm thankful that you are with us today. Again, my name is Tammy Landis. I'm the museum educator and curator here at the Western Gallery, and we are sitting with Chloe Dichter, artist in this exhibition. And I want to jump right in to the artist talk because there is a lot of things to chat about Chloe's work. And I feel like I continue to think of and learn new things every time I come in and experience your installation. And so just to give you all a little bit of a context before I start asking Chloe some questions, we're sitting in, a smaller partition space in the Western Gallery. So we're in the larger gallery, but Chloe's installation is made up of about 3 walls, and there's shelves on each of the walls. And 3 different bodies of work are inhabiting each of these spaces. And so we're going to talk about, what each of these bodies represent in their work. But I just want you all to get a better sense of where we are. So we're only sitting in front of one aspect, but you'll get some views of these other bodies of work on the camera here. So Chloe, maybe we should start out with what is the title of this work? And you and I were talking about this a while ago. Do you title the pieces individually, or do we want to call this a total installation and give it one title, which is what you've decided to do? So can you tell us about the title and what it means in this body of work for you?
Definitely. So hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here. The title of my installation is Beschert. It is actually a Yiddish phrase. It was something that my grandfather always used, and it means, what will be will be. Something's meant to be. It's kind of, it can even refer to like someone being someone's soulmate. And, whenever something bad would happen or good, he would say it's Beschert. And so that always stuck with me. And to this day, I still use Yiddish because my grandparents used it, and it was instilled in me within my childhood. And so, I thought with this work of how delicate it is, just embracing it, embracing that delicacy and embracing the fragility of it. And whatever happened would just happen to it. So if a cracker broke during the process, it was Beschert, it was meant to be. And so I thought that was kind of a fitting title. And it was also an homage to my grandfather, Herman. So.
And, taking another step back into Chloe's work, your work is all about your familial history, your heritage. And so for you to have a title that is also indicative of your grandfather, I mean, that adds a whole layer. So let's dive into that. Let's dive into, the start of this body of work, because I think that's was really fascinating to me. When I met with Chloe in maybe February of doing my first studio visit, Chloe shared how you came across the source imagery for this body of work. So let's dive into where all this started.
Definitely. Yeah. So originally I moved here from LA. My whole family's based out of Los Angeles. And I was home visiting for Passover. And my aunt, she was like, you can take all the photographs that are in the garage. And there was boxes and boxes of them. There were slides and there was print photographs, film, everything. And so as a photographer, it was like a treasure trove. I was super, super excited to, just sit down and just dig through every single one of these photographs. And so it kind of just started there, retrieving and getting all these photographs, bringing them back up here to Bellingham. And then from there, I was like, I have these photographs of these people. And for the most part, I knew them because they were my close relatives. But some of them were like strangers to me, even though I was related to them by blood. And so I started just using basic like genealogical research platforms like Ancestry.com and started to just sort of connect the dots. And at this point, I found these photographs and I was like, I'm totally going to make something with these. I felt connected to these photographs. There was something that was really drawing me in. And then at that point, I felt like I was kind of taking on this, being kind of an archivist at the same time as being an artist. And I kind of ended up almost loving being an archivist just as much as being the artist. And it's been an absolute honor to actually physically hold these photographs and to, reconstruct them into something that, I was able to put my own touch on, because these photographs, I didn't actually take them, but I'm trying to reinterpret them into something that allowed me to put my stamp on them, even though I may not know some of them. So,
and I think it was powerful. I remember when you shared with me, your aunt had this box that she was potentially going to get rid of, or was like not interested in keeping. And so now your family's like pictorial history is in your hands. And as a photographer, of course, you're going to cherish the image, right? So let's dive into what we're sitting next to, because I think for our online audience, they're seeing glass vessels with some type of material in it. But I want to break down a bit more of what we're looking at. Can you describe what this is?
Definitely. Yeah. It was definitely a process to get to this and how this came about. While working with a matzah cracker and trying to create an image on top of something so delicate, there was definitely some fatalities that happened. Some crackers definitely didn't make it through the process. And, holding something so just fragile and holding this history and this memory and this person in my hands, it also allowed me to, dismantle it. And so I decided that I would actually just start to slowly deconstruct them. Some just started to decay on their own, even some started to mold. And so I wanted to just further that breakdown, and I decided to just start collecting them in these kind of vases, and they kind of take on this clinical, they look kind of clinical, but in a way, I don't want to necessarily call them urns, but these are definitely remnants of these full pieces, something of what was, but I still think that even though they're not in their whole state, that they can still hold this power and they can still hold space. And so I wanted to kind of just acknowledge these little pieces. And it's been kind of this idea of putting all these pieces together to figure out this whole picture, which I still don't know. So, nor will I probably ever. So.
Yeah. I think it's really powerful because you show your work in various stages of decay, and it's very fragile from the beginning. And, there's this interesting dichotomy as a photographer, right? You take pictures to preserve something and to hold something that's lasting. So then for you as a photographer to use the cyanotype process, which we'll talk about, on a very fragile surface that's going to fall apart. It's like the opposite of what most photographers are thinking about doing to preserve. So I think it's really powerful. So just so everyone understands what we're looking at, right? So you have on the matzah crackers, the portraits, and those can only, how long would you say they last in that form until they fall apart?
so far, I still have some of the originals I made about
Okay.
2 months ago. So again, this is all completely experimental, working with something that is perishable, working with food. It's definitely
Yeah.
not archival.
Yeah.
And I kind of knew that going into it, but I still really wanted to, delve into this world of working with something that is completely, ephemeral and that it is fleeting. But so far, the lifespan is about 2 months, 3.
Okay.
They could last longer. I don't really know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think, if you all get to come into the gallery, and someone else I know expressed this to you, Chloe, but I felt it the first time when I got to come in and experience your installation complete. I wanted to hold my breath. It felt so fragile because I was aware of the fragility of the matzo crackers, and then seeing the pieces of what they become. And then also another part of your installation, you have the cyanotype process on eggshells, which we all know is also a very frail
Yes.
material. So it's like you walk in here and you really need to be careful. And, I think there's a lot of depth to Chloe's work here, where Chloe has shared that these are just not random images. This is your family history. And I remember you used the terms that the matzo crackers revealed cracks and fractures, just like what's evident in family and heritage. So I just wanted to bring attention to that again, right? It's for you, the images are powerful, but the material is really significant. So could you maybe bring us to the moment of when you decided to use matzo crackers and eggshells, and how those reveal other concepts in more depth to your work?
For sure. I had first landed on, making these images on matzo crackers, because not only, I grew up eating matzo crackers, not just during holidays, but my dad would make matzo brie for breakfast. And so it was something that was kind of a staple in the household. And also the matzo cracker itself holds a really historical, long history itself. And so I thought that this would be a beautiful pairing, and also just thinking about the idea of, families and the tradition of sitting down to eat. And so I'm always kind of hearkening back to this idea of, what's the familial and, what my family did as traditions. And then the eggshells, I decided that, really emphasizing this idea of, kind of life and death. And eggs are traditionally eaten when you're sitting Shiva, which is after a funeral, after someone has passed. And eggs kind of symbolize this idea of the circle of life. And, it's not just to mourn this loss, but to also celebrate life, and that, life continues on. And so, I kind of wanted this installation to kind of act as this genesis to ash. And so moving from this idea of like the birth of something to its existence, and then to its breakdown state. And so it kind of just moves in of kind of like this cycle of life is what I was kind of going for. So that's why the installation kind of ended up being in this separate space that kind of feels like its own environment.
And then what we're looking at that's behind us, the framed photographs, tell us why you decided to include those.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, working on a matzo cracker, it is completely temporary. And the works that are in here are just portraits. They're just one singular cracker. But I wanted to also make these larger compositions of full body images. Most of the photographs that I was gifted were just portraits, but I did also have these really historic photographs that were of people that I don't know their names, they're unknown, but they're part of my family. And so each of these photographs are probably from the turn of the century, and they no longer exist. I made them, and probably within a couple days we're just gone. The images just slowly start to disappear. I don't know why that is. These ones were able to last, and these larger ones just don't really, they just don't have that lifespan. And so I still wanted to memorialize them. So just making digital prints of them was kind of the best way of going about that.
So for those that are not as familiar with the cyanotype process, could you tell us about that? And, blue is kind of iconic, representative of the cyanotype process. Cyanotype process. Could you describe that a little bit for those that might not be familiar?
Yeah, definitely.
And how you did it on matzo crackers.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
And the eggshells.
Yes, it is definitely a historical photographic process. It goes back to the 18th century. I started to explore it during one of my classes, and I kind of became very much obsessed and involved in it. And when starting to work on my own body of work, and when I'd been gifted these photographs, I thought that this might be this really beautiful marriage between this historical photograph, this historical vessel being a matzah cracker, and these images that are historical. And then just in general, this Prussian deep blue is very, kind of relates to this idea of truth and divinity within Judaism. And so I thought that this marriage of them would be really beautiful. But printing on the cracker, I thought it would be harder than it was. It's really just as if you would use the chemistry on paper or any other surface, you just paint it directly onto a cracker. But actually the hard thing was the eggshells was incredibly difficult, especially adhering an image to an eggshell is a little hard. But yeah, I definitely had to eat a lot of eggs to get all these. I probably ended up eating like 5 to 6 dozen eggs. So I need a break from eggs, but it was definitely worth it in the end. But yeah.
That's hilarious. I didn't even consider that. It's really funny. So, in the installation with the eggshells, they're all lined up next to each other, and they have lights, little lights
Yes.
emanating from the interior. Was that an aesthetic choice, or is there a meaning, by having this collective of portraits all lined up next to each other? I mean, sure, you could have just put one in the space, but you decided to create a linear,
Yes.
installation of them.
Yeah, I kind of wanted these eggs to kind of represent this idea of like, a family unit, and kind of looking at this idea, when I was looking at these genealogical platforms, they showed family trees and kind of, them moving through time. And so I thought that eggs could represent that. And the lights are intentional, although it does really illuminate the image. You can see it. The lights that are lighting the eggs, they have a lifespan, and they do exhaust. And so I kind of wanted, these lights and these eggs to represent someone's light going out without being too morbid. But all these images of these people that are on here are dead. And so I thought that was kind of a really interesting way to represent this idea of death, but also the celebration of life at the same time.
And in general, along with that, so you have the eggshells, you have the matzah crackers, and you have these vessels along with the other images, the digital images. When you walk in here, you're surrounded now by your family history through your interpretation of it, through a whole different perspective. Now that it's up and you've been in here, like, how does it feel to see your family history on this side of it, from your interpretation, especially portraits gazing out, it's different than a landscape. You're making a connection to a face. And these are not just necessarily strangers, kind of, but these are your family.
Yeah.
So what is it like for you to inhabit this space, as this is your family that's on view now?
Definitely. Yeah. It's kind of crazy to have everybody, see this kind of personal part, into my life. And I've always said that, this work is definitely in a personal endeavor, and it is personal. It's my family. And, along with that is kind of, coming to terms with a lot of my own, connecting to my Jewish identity and to my heritage. And I just think that, coming into this space, I kind of want people to, not only get a glimpse into me and to my family and my history, but also just kind of focusing on this kind of fragility of time and of memory, and grasping to that, and kind of not wanting to let go is kind of how I felt about it. And just at the same time, you kind of have to embrace the inevitable, and whatever that may be. So
yeah. So can you back us up a little bit? The BFA year is unique, right? You have a year intensive. And for those that aren't as familiar, the BFA year is just 1 year to create a body of work that now you have installed here in the Western Gallery. But like going back to the fall, going into it, did you envision this, or where were you in the fall? What were you thinking about making?
No, none of this existed, not even in my mind. I was using the same imagery, and I knew that I was going to, I wanted to make photographic sculptures. I was, I've always been a photographer, but I desperately wanted to get off the wall. I just didn't want to do a 2-dimensional photograph on the wall. And so, the whole time I played with different materials, and I kind of struggled to land on a particular substrate or a vessel that really just, I thought, connected. And but yeah, I always knew I was going to do the cyanotype process, and I was going to focus on, working this body of work and developing it, using this imagery and continuing to be an archivist while also being an artist. And but no, none of this existed. This only started to develop probably in the winter quarter, so early on.
I think it's really powerful how Chloe just shared, you're drawn to the photography in a three-dimensional aspect. I think that's really powerful. And I think you've achieved that here, right? You've created a tactile photographic installation, and material is very significant in this installation, to say the least.
Yes.
Yeah. So, now you've created this body of work, and we're moving to you're going to move beyond your BFA year. Are you going to continue making work with these images, the source box of your family collection, or do you want to move into something different?
Yeah, no, I think that, I'm never going to get away from this idea of being so personally connected to these images that there's no way that I can just, that this is it. I think that this body of work is going to carry on. I mean, it may not be on an eggshell, it may not be on a matzo cracker, although I kind of like the idea of being a matzo cracker artist. But I definitely want to, explore some other realms of photographic sculpture, but I think I always will still be some sort of a cyanotype artist too. I've done a lot of other stuff that involves that process. And but yeah, I don't know where this body of work will end up, and I don't know how long these will last for.
Right.
So this may be the one time they are displayed for the public to see. So.
Right. Wow, that's something really important to consider, right? When people are experiencing this. So I know that we have some questions, and I would love to be able to get to those while we have Chloe with us here live. So Chris, why don't you go ahead and read maybe a question, and Chloe can address that?
You bet. We have just one so far, but I'm sure as we answer this one, there will be more. What artists in particular influenced you for making this work?
That's a good question. I actually thought about that before this interview started. But I'm definitely have always been drawn to Christian Boltanski's work and the way in which he creates photographic sculpture and the way in which that he presents it. And that was kind of one of my biggest difficulties. Wasn't making the work or how to make the work, it was how I was going to present it. Just because I was trying to, tackle this idea of working with something that wasn't preservable and possibly not in enough time for people to see it. So I looked a lot to his work. And then in general, I really love Bin Don's work and the way in which that he also prints on unconventional items. He does chlorophyll prints on leaves and on bamboo and on grass. And so I definitely looked to those particular two artists when I was doing this body of work.
Thanks, Chris. Do we have another? Yeah.
Oh, we certainly do. We certainly do. What was one of the most joyful aspects of creating this piece? And similarly, what was one of the hardest parts of the creation process?
Yeah, that's a good question too. Probably the most joyful moment was, the first time I decided to print on the matzo cracker. I had gotten the idea, I was eating breakfast and I was like, what if I tried to print on an actual cracker? And so I ran over to Fred Meyer, I got a box of Manischewitz, I went straight to the photo lab, and it totally worked. And I was just absolutely amazed. And I knew right from there, I was like, this is what I'm going to do for my thesis. And it was incredibly exciting because I just think I know when that moment hits and when it clicks and when something feels right. And that was that moment. And probably the most frustrating thing was, again, this idea of working with a cracker. There was definitely a lot of moments where it's just the most slight wrong maneuver and it would hit the floor and it would shatter in a bunch of pieces. So like I said, there was a lot of fatalities. I think I ended up going through, I don't know, maybe 65, 70 crackers to get the 9 that I wanted to. I still have a lot of other ones, but just again, working with the eggshells, they're also super frustrating. And so it just takes a lot of making a lot of it to get the exact ones I wanted to. So even though there's just 9 here, there was a lot that went into it. There's a lot that, that had to get to this point. So.
Please discuss process and concept What drives your work, the form or the research?
I think that initially it was the research that wanted me to continue to explore this in a photographic sense. But I think the process was what I love is when it comes to photographic processes, I love being in the darkroom and I love being able to work with my hands. I've always thought that old school is cool school, and so I've always been attracted to either imagery or processes or anything that's historical or antiquated. And so being able to, be in the dark room and physically hold a little eggshell and be there in paint and then turn my little headlamp on and make sure it's coated just right. And I think that was kind of addictive for me. It was, even though it was equally frustrating, at the same time, when it turned out, it was incredibly rewarding. So I think that it was a balance of both. I was interested in the process and also the research and everything that went into it. I feel like I definitely put my whole heart and soul into the whole project.
Thanks, Chris. So I know I have some other questions I wanted to bring up with you. So, I mean, this is so steeped in your identity, this work, and there's something about being vulnerable to represent that. I mean, you could have represented so many other things, but I remember reading in your artist statement and our conversations early on that it was also really important for you to address aspects of your Jewish identity and, the history of Judaism and the fragility of this material and how it relates to that part of your identity and that history. Could you talk on that a little bit more? And like, what ideas of that do you want people to walk away with considering?
Yeah, well, on the personal side and investigating my own identity, for a while I had a hard time, not necessarily connecting to, my family who was Jewish because I grew up with them, but I'm patrilineally Jewish. My mother is not Jewish, and so I guess like technically and within, I guess, the Jewish religion, you're not really fully Jewish unless your mother is the one who is Jewish. And so I felt like I couldn't really claim that as my identity, although I felt so steeped within Judaism and also being very culturally Jewish. I consider myself a secular Jew. I'm not really a practicing Jew. I'm by no means Orthodox, but that was kind of what that started with. And being able to be close to these images and being able to just like hold them in my hands and being able to be like I know this person even though I don't, was kind of that kind of spirituality coming through a little bit. But yeah, what was the other part of your question? I'm sorry, I forgot.
I think you addressed most of it. I mean, just like how the material relates to your identity too, because I know you talked about the fragility, the fractures, and like the realities of what has happened with the Jewish people and even, currently, and thinking about fragility and eradication is something I remember you addressing. Yeah. So I don't know if you wanted to expand on that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like all of this, but I feel like this is what this was kind of drawing on, this particular work of, focusing on this idea of like erasure over time, not only of erasure of identity and of history, but of memory. And I kind of wanted to really focus on that. Yeah. Of, like I wanted to know what was happening in these images that I was seeing and being able to know these people, but moments are so fleeting, yet they're captured on images. And so I feel like in the way I was trying to represent this idea of this loss and trying to, hang on to what I could by having these fractures, and also the process of breaking them myself after going through so much time, and the process of just getting them adhered to a cracker and then drying, and then finally, breaking them down myself. And in a way, I felt like I was participating in like my own erasure of this, like, these images and my family and this identity. And so it was kind of complicated personally, but at the same time, it kind of felt right. And it felt like a release in a sense to just break these down and just let them be, because they were already going to break down. But I kind of, my touch, my hand of the artist was just to, act as a catalyst of this and just to further their breakdown to that point.
That's so powerful. And I do hope, those of you that are listening virtually, I hope you can come in and experience this work and see we keep using the word fragility, but truly, I mean, we're looking at crumbs of what previously held images, like
Yes.
the other works that you see in here. So these different stages, it's very fragile, and your work is very powerful in communicating, those different elements. So for those, when they do come in to experience your work, what message or what message do you hope people walk away feeling, experiencing, understanding after seeing your work?
Yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier, but
Yeah.
Coming in and seeing the work and just kind of really sitting with the thought of how fragile and how how fragile time is, and also memories attached to that. And I feel like another message that I would just like to say in general is, if you have elders or ancestors that are alive, and you are able to talk to them, I would highly encourage you to be able to sit down with them and ask them these questions. Ask them about memories of when they were children, and ask them, where did your parents come from, and what are their names? Because part of my research, the difficulty was I didn't know anybody's name past a certain point, because also my grandparents had already been passed away at this point during this project. And so I didn't really have anybody to turn to. And the whole time I did the project, my biggest regret was I wish I could have asked my grandparents all these, because they were kind of the beholder of all this information. And unfortunately, a lot of it died with them. And so, I can only do so much as a contemporary modern person with this, lack of information. But that would probably be my biggest thing is, ask. So you don't know until you ask.
That's really important. I would agree. Yeah. And you've shown us how fragile family history is. So I think that's a major concept in this. So unfortunately, we're out of time, but as you all can see, there's a lot to take in here in Chloe's work. And I do hope you can all come in and experience it in person, physically, be surrounded by these images. It really communicates on a whole other level than just seeing it, on a digital platform. So Chloe, to you, congratulations again.
Thank you.
Right? You've accomplished your BFA year during a global pandemic, in a program you were disrupted in many ways, but you've been able to accomplish a lot of success in this body of work. And it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you for being open and for sharing. A lot of this is very personal to you, but I think it does add a lot to our audience and for me personally, to understand you and your work more. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yes.
And thank you all for listening in. Thank you for your participation today. I do hope that you can listen in on our other artist talks. We have more this week and we'll have more next week as well. But we look forward to seeing you then. And thanks again.